The morning sun glistened over the immaculate lawns of Hawthorne Estate, a place so obsessively perfect that even the dew seemed to ask permission before touching the billionaire's grass. Every tree was trimmed to mathematical precision, every flower bed maintained by gardeners who earned more than schoolteachers, and every step within its iron gates belonged to one man, Alexander Hawthorne, the cold-faced tycoon whose real estate empire stretched across half the country. But that morning, something was wrong. Something out of place. Something Alexander's world was not designed to handle. A sharp, cutting shout split the silence. "Get your hands off my daughter, right now." Alexander stood 20 feet away, frozen mid-stride, his $4,000 Italian loafers pressing into the grass he normally never walked on. His perfectly tailored charcoal suit looked almost ridiculous in contrast to what he was seeing. There, beneath the shadow of a flowering magnolia tree, sat his daughter, 12-year-old Eleanor Hawthorne, the girl who had everything money could offer and nothing money could fix. And beside her was a barefoot black girl he had never seen before. Books were scattered around them like fallen leaves. Eleanor's notebook, usually blank, usually abandoned after 5 minutes of frustration, was filled with handwriting. Real handwriting. Her handwriting. And the strange girl was whispering equations in a voice so steady, so confident, so impossibly calm that Eleanor hung on every syllable as if hearing the secrets of the universe. Alexander blinked, unable to process the image. His daughter hadn't focused on a lesson in months. Teachers came and went. Therapists gave up. Private tutors charged hundreds per hour and still left in exhausted defeat. But now, she was studying. She was learning. She was smiling. The barefoot girl lifted her head slowly, as if she had sensed his presence long before he arrived. There was no panic in her eyes. No guilt. No fear. Just a stillness too old for her small frame. She closed the book gently, not hurriedly, not guiltily, and stood up with a dignity that didn't match the torn hoodie she wore or the dirt on her skin. Eleanor scrambled to her feet. "Dad, wait. She's helping me with algebra. I finally understand it." Alexander ignored his daughter. His eyes locked onto the intruder. His jaw tightened. "How did you get in here? Where are my security guards?" Before the girl could answer, 2 guards rushed into view, panting and confused. "Sir, we don't know how she got past the cameras." The girl remained silent. But something in her calm stare unsettled Alexander in a way no business rival ever had. It felt like she knew something he didn't. As if she had been waiting for this confrontation. Eleanor stepped protectively in front of the girl. "Dad, please. She didn't do anything wrong." Alexander's voice dropped, becoming a blade. "Eleanor. Move. Now." The girl finally spoke. "You're right," she said softly. "I shouldn't be here." Her voice held no trembling. No apology. Only truth. "But your daughter," she continued, "was drowning long before I arrived." Alexander's brows furrowed. "What did you say?" "She can't reverse the numbers in her head," the girl said calmly. "She mixes up sequences. Letters flip. Words distort." Her eyes flickered to Eleanor. "That's dyslexia." The air went dead silent. Eleanor stared at the girl in shock. No teacher had said this. No tutor had even suspected it. But the barefoot child standing calmly in Alexander's garden had diagnosed Eleanor's hidden struggle in a few seconds of observation. "You're lying," Alexander snapped, though something inside him had already cracked. "It's not stupidity," the girl continued. "Her brain works differently. Someone should have noticed." Alexander's pulse throbbed dangerously. "How do you know this?" The girl lifted her chin. "Because I pay attention, something all your expensive professionals failed to do." Eleanor's breath hitched. Alexander's eyes burned. The guards shifted nervously. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Who was this girl? How did she see so deeply into problems even experts had missed? Why did she speak with the calmness of someone who expected not to be believed? Alexander stepped closer, towering over her. "Name," he demanded. "Aria." Her voice didn't waver. "Aria Sinclair." "And what are you doing on my property, Aria?" "Teaching," she said simply. "Because your daughter wanted help. And because she deserves more than people pretending to care." Alexander froze. He had no words. This girl, this barefoot stranger, had walked into his perfect empire and shattered its illusions with a single sentence. Eleanor whispered, "Dad, please listen to her." But Alexander was a man who built kingdoms. He did not listen to children. Especially not homeless, barefoot ones who somehow slipped past his cameras like ghosts. He straightened. Coldness returned to his posture. "Security," he said without looking away from Aria. "Escort her off the property. And if she's seen near my daughter again, call the police." Aria said nothing. But her eyes held a promise. Not anger. Not fear. A warning. A prophecy. A storm he did not yet understand. And as she was led out through the iron gates, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years. A strange, unsettling chill. Like he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. For the world outside Hawthorne Estate, Aria Sinclair was invisible. A 12-year-old nobody with dirt on her shoes, a torn backpack she'd found in a dumpster, and a mother who drifted in and out of psychotic storms like a broken ship lost at sea. But invisibility, she had learned, was not a curse. It was camouflage. It was how she survived. And it was exactly how she slipped into the billionaire's world long before Alexander Hawthorne ever yelled her name. Long before the confrontation in the garden, Aria had watched the estate from afar, from behind bushes, from the shade of bus stops, from the corners of streets no rich man would ever step foot on. Not out of jealousy, not out of envy, not out of criminal intent. But out of necessity. Her mother, Lena, had begun wandering the streets at night, screaming at shadows. Days went by when she didn't remember Aria's name. Nights passed when she forgot they hadn't eaten. Their shelter bed was unpredictable. Their safety even more so. Aria needed somewhere quiet, somewhere she could think, study, and breathe. Not to escape poverty. But to escape chaos. And across the street, Hawthorne Estate stood like a silent kingdom. A fortress of order, discipline, and stillness. For Aria, that estate became her classroom. It began with the library window. Every afternoon, she would hide behind the hedge near the east fence line, where the cameras rotated with a predictable rhythm. She had studied them for weeks. There were 5-second blind spots during shift changes. 7-second dead zones when the motion sensors reset. A 30-second gap every hour when the west camera rebooted. Aria memorized it all. She didn't break in, not at first. She simply listened. Through the open windows of the estate's library, private tutors lectured Eleanor Hawthorne in voices filled with irritation and money. They droned on about equations, grammar rules, historical dates, while Eleanor shrank smaller and smaller in her chair, confusion twisting her face like a knife. And Aria, hidden in the bushes, solved every question under her breath before the tutors finished asking them. She didn't know why she was so good at it. She had no school, no textbooks, no classroom. But numbers made sense to her. Patterns spoke to her. People revealed themselves to her without even realizing. And Eleanor's pain was loud. Aria heard it clearer than any tutor. One afternoon, Eleanor burst out of the library in tears, her notebook crumpled in her hand. She collapsed behind the magnolia tree, muffling her sobs into her sleeves. Aria watched from the shadows, frozen. She wasn't supposed to care. She had learned that caring only made heartbreak heavier. But something pulled her forward. She took one careful step out of hiding. Another. And then realized Eleanor was staring right at her. Where did you come from? Eleanor whispered, startled but not afraid. Aria hesitated. From behind the magnolia trunk. From behind the world of the unseen. But what she said was simply, I was watching. Eleanor wiped her tears. Watching what? You, Aria responded. Struggling with numbers they don't know how to teach. Eleanor's eyes widened. You know algebra? Aria shrugged. I know everything. It wasn't arrogance. It was survival. You either learned fast on the streets, or you fell behind forever. That moment, small, accidental, fragile, became the beginning of a secret. Eleanor would sneak to the garden with her textbooks. Aria would slip through the gaps she had mapped in her mind. And together they built a classroom beneath the magnolia tree. Aria's lessons weren't like the tutors. She didn't yell. She didn't sigh in frustration. She didn't act like teaching was a burden. She explained numbers like they were stories. She drew pictures in the dirt. She used leaves as equation pieces. Sticks became lines. Pebbles became variables. Eleanor learned more in 3 days than she had in 3 years. And each day, Aria blended back into the world before the guards even realized the cameras had blinked. But Aria wasn't just teaching Eleanor. She was studying someone else too. Alexander Hawthorne. She watched him return late every night, shoulders tight, phone locked to his ear, his eyes never drifting toward the garden where his daughter cried quietly when she failed another assignment. She watched him leave before sunrise, too busy building empires to notice the small girl who struggled to read numbers without flipping them around. She watched him ignore everything that wasn't profitable. And that troubled her. Aria didn't hate the man. She simply saw him for who he was. A king who ruled everything except the broken pieces inside his own home. She knew he would find her eventually. She knew he would explode. Rich men always did when confronted by the people they pretended not to see. But she didn't expect their first meeting to shift the ground beneath both of them. She didn't expect the truth she saw in Eleanor to ignite something Alexander couldn't outrun. And she didn't expect their quiet afternoons to become the spark that would burn down a billionaire's empire. Aria was a trespasser, yes. But she was also something far more dangerous. A girl with nothing to lose. A mind sharper than any tutor money could buy. And the ability to see what the wealthy refused to look at. And Alexander Hawthorne had just thrown her out. He had no idea he had thrown out the only person who could save him from what was coming. Alexander Hawthorne prided himself on being a man who understood the world through numbers. Numbers built his empire. Numbers predicted markets. Numbers told him everything he needed to know. But the one number he never understood was his daughter. And that was exactly where Aria Sinclair had just cut him deepest. The night after Aria was dragged out through the iron gates, the Hawthorne mansion felt eerily quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that crawls under your skin and whispers that something is missing, something important, something you were too blind to notice while it was still there. From the staircase, Eleanor peered over the railing, staring at the empty garden where Aria used to sit. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wood, her knuckles white. For the first time in years, she looked like a child who had lost her only safe place. "Ellie," Alexander called from the living room, "come down. We need to talk." Eleanor didn't move. Her voice was barely audible. "You didn't even listen to her." Alexander straightened. "Listen to who? A trespasser?" "She's not a trespasser." Eleanor snapped, louder, bolder than she had ever spoken to him. "She understands me. She saw things nobody else ever saw." Alexander's jaw tightened. "She is a random street girl who manipulated you. She's the only one who understood why I mix up numbers." The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Not a single coherent sentence. Because deep down, beneath layers of pride, wealth, and polished arrogance, a small voice whispered. She might be right. While father and daughter waged silent war inside, another battle was unfolding outside the mansion walls. Aria sat in the corner of the city's public shelter, a dimly lit room that smelled of old blankets and hopelessness. Her torn backpack lay beside her. She wasn't crying. She rarely did. Instead, she replayed Alexander's voice in her head. "How dare you? Question qualified professionals. Qualified. Expensive. Useless." She pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper, Eleanor's practice problems. The numbers tangled, reversed, flipped. Aria had seen kids like this before. In shelters. On the streets. In underfunded classrooms where teachers were too overwhelmed to care. Dyslexia wasn't rare. Ignoring it was. Aria closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. She doesn't even know she's not stupid. That hurt more than anything. Because she knew what it felt like, being blamed for something your brain simply processed differently. Nobody had ever diagnosed Aria either. She just learned to adapt on her own. But Eleanor? Eleanor had a father worth billions. And still had no one who paid enough attention to notice. Meanwhile, Alexander paced in his private study, the room lined with mahogany bookshelves and diplomas he had earned decades ago. He dialed numbers, called specialists, demanded answers. Every tutor said the same thing. "Sir, your daughter lacks focus. Sir, she becomes overwhelmed easily. Sir, she doesn't apply herself." Not one brought up dyslexia. He slumped into his leather chair, rubbing his temples. How had a barefoot child with no formal education seen more than professionals who earned fortunes? The question carved itself into his mind like a scar. What else had he missed about his own daughter? Later that evening, Eleanor sat cross-legged in her room, staring at Aria's notebook. It was filled with tiny diagrams, shortcuts, explanations that made math open itself like a blooming flower. Aria didn't teach her equations. She taught her clarity, confidence, possibility. Eleanor touched the page where Aria had written, "Your brain isn't broken. It just speaks its own language." A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek. Her father had never told her anything that kind. The next morning, Alexander asked Eleanor to meet him in the library. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust particles dancing like tiny galaxies. Eleanor stood stiffly, arms crossed. Alexander cleared his throat. "Ellie, tell me exactly what she said. About your reading." Eleanor hesitated. "She said I see numbers out of order. That letters feel like they move sometimes. That I mix up sequences because my brain works differently." Alexander swallowed. "Anne, has this been happening long?" Eleanor stared at the carpet, and whispered the truth she had carried alone for years. "Since I was 7. Alexander froze. 7. 5 years. 5 years of his daughter struggling silently while he built skyscrapers. He felt something wrench inside him. A pain sharper than any business loss he had ever endured. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Eleanor answered with a single sentence that shattered him. "Because you were never here long enough to notice." In that moment, for the first time in his life, Alexander Hawthorne felt small. Truly, painfully, unforgivably small. The barefoot girl he had ordered off his property had seen his daughter more clearly in 2 weeks than he had seen her in 12 years. He stared at Eleanor, at the child he had failed without even realizing it. And in a voice low with realization, he whispered, "Aria Sinclair, how did she know what none of us did?" He didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would soon unravel every certainty he had ever built his life upon. The next morning arrived with the kind of brittle silence that warned of storms long before clouds touched the sky. Hawthorne Estate felt different, colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves knew a terrible mistake had been made. Alexander Hawthorne stood in his office overlooking the garden, pretending to read emails while his eyes kept drifting toward the magnolia tree. The tree where Eleanor used to laugh. The tree where Aria Sinclair had once sat like she belonged there, even though he had made it violently clear she did not. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself he had protected his family. He told himself order must be preserved. But every time he closed his eyes, Aria's calm voice echoed. "She's not stupid. Her brain just works differently." Anyone paying attention would have seen it. Paying attention. The phrase clawed at his chest like guilt with sharp nails. Meanwhile, on the street several miles away, Aria sat outside the public library's stone steps with her backpack pressed to her chest. Her mother wandered nearby, murmuring to people who weren't there. Aria didn't try to stop her. Her mother fought shadows, shadows Aria could never chase away. But studying? That she could control. She opened a borrowed chemistry book, but the words blurred. The letters didn't flip, no, Aria's mind worked flawlessly, but the world felt heavy, pressing on her like an accusation she didn't deserve. She hadn't meant to make Eleanor cry. She hadn't meant to upset the billionaire. She hadn't meant to cause chaos in a world that wasn't hers. She had only wanted one thing. To help a girl who reminded her painfully of herself. But Alexander didn't see that. To him, she was an intruder. A danger. A threat to his perfectly engineered life. Aria closed the book and whispered to no one. He didn't even try to understand. Back in the mansion, Eleanor refused to come downstairs. Her bedroom door stayed locked. Her meals went untouched. Alexander stood outside her room, hands in fists, feeling more powerless than he ever had in a boardroom where billions were at stake. "Ellie, please open the door." Nothing. He tried again. "She's gone. You're safe now." But that was the problem. Eleanor opened the door just a crack, enough for him to see her swollen eyes. "Safe? Safe from what?" "From the only person who ever helped me." Alexander's breath caught. "She wasn't supposed to be here," he said softly. "Because she's homeless?" Eleanor shot back. "Because she's black? Because she doesn't belong in your world?" Alexander flinched. The words hit too close to the truth. Eleanor stepped out, trembling with fury. "You didn't get rid of her for me, Dad. You got rid of her for your pride." He had no response. Because she was right. That afternoon, in a desperate attempt to regain control, Alexander made the worst decision of all. He ordered Eleanor transferred to a prestigious boarding school in Boston. No more distractions, he told her. No more bad influences. Eleanor's scream echoed through the mansion. "She is not a bad influence. She saved me." Alexander hardened his expression. "Pack your things." Eleanor stared at him, betrayal carved into her young face. "You're sending me away," she whispered. "Because she made you feel small." His chest tightened. But he didn't take the words back. He couldn't. He didn't know how. That night, while Alexander drowned himself in paperwork he wasn't really reading, Eleanor pulled out a small slip of paper Aria had given her, almost like she knew this moment would come. A phone number. Written in crooked pencil. Her hands trembled as she dialed. The line clicked. "Aria?" A soft inhale on the other end. "Ellie? Are you okay?" Eleanor burst into tears. "He's sending me away." Aria didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She simply understood. "No," Aria whispered. "Rich people think distance solves problems. What do we do?" Aria looked at her mother sleeping on a bench nearby. Her voice was soft. Resolute. "You go. You study. You become everything you're meant to be. And you?" Eleanor choked out. Aria looked at the moonlit street, cold, unforgiving, her only home. "I stay here," she murmured. "And I fight a battle he doesn't even know he already started." Because Alexander Hawthorne had thrown her away like nothing. But Aria Sinclair was done being nothing. She would show him that people society ignored were the ones he should have feared the most. Boston swallowed Eleanor Hawthorne whole. New uniforms, new hallways, new teachers, none of it mattered. The moment she stepped into the boarding school, she felt the weight of loss settle in her chest like a stone she couldn't put down. But far away, beneath a flickering street lamp outside the city library, Aria Sinclair was preparing for war. Not with fists. Not with violence. But with the only weapon she had ever trusted. Knowledge. The first step had been simple. She returned to the public library the morning after Eleanor left, sat at the farthest computer, and typed one word into the search bar. Hawthorne Corporation. The results exploded across the screen, hundreds of buildings, dozens of government contracts, pages of lawsuits buried under expensive settlements. Aria leaned closer. The deeper she looked, the uglier it became. Housing complexes built on unsafe land. Schools with untested ventilation systems. Low-income families relocated to contaminated neighborhoods. Whistleblowers silenced with legal threats. Each file felt like a puzzle piece she had always known existed. Alexander Hawthorne didn't just ignore people like her. He profited from them. Her blood went cold. She opened document after document, her fingers flying across the keyboard. By noon she had a folder. By evening she filled a second one. By dawn the next day, she had more evidence of corporate wrongdoing than most journalists collected in their entire careers. Not because she had connections. Not because she had power. But because she had nothing left to lose. For the next week, Aria became a ghost lurking in the corners of the library. She printed everything she could afford. She saved files to old USB drives she found abandoned in the computer lab. She wrote legal terms in the margins of junk mail envelopes she collected from trash cans. One afternoon, a voice broke the silence. "Sweetheart, do you know what you're looking at?" Aria stiffened. A woman with silver-streaked hair, reading glasses, and the warm but fierce eyes of someone who had survived many wars sat beside her. Her badge read, Professor Miriam Blake, Public Law and Civil Justice. Aria slid her notebook closed. Just studying. Miriam smiled, a knowing smile. Most children study multiplication tables. You're analyzing federal housing contracts. Aria hesitated. Then, quietly. I need to understand how someone that powerful gets away with hurting so many people. Miriam's expression sharpened. You have information? Aria swallowed. Yes. Do you trust me? The woman asked. No, Aria replied honestly. But I trust justice. Miriam's smile widened. Then we're on the same side. For the first time in her life, Aria sat across from someone who didn't flinch at her intelligence. She spent hours explaining every document she found. Miriam reviewed each one with increasing horror, pulling out her phone, emailing colleagues, whispering words no adult had ever said about Aria before. She's brilliant. She has a legal mind. She sees patterns even trained lawyers miss. Aria's cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to praise. She didn't know where to put it. She only knew one thing. If Eleanor had dyslexia, then Aria had an instinct. Something sharp. Something dangerous. Something rare. And she was finally using it. Within 2 weeks, Aria, Miriam, and 3 law students had assembled a dossier the size of a brick, packed with evidence that could dismantle Hawthorne Corporation from the foundation up. Still, Aria felt no pride. Only purpose. When Miriam asked her why she cared so much, Aria answered with a truth that made the room fall silent. Because someone like him decided a girl like me didn't matter. Her voice hardened. And I want to prove that he was wrong. But Aria's plan wasn't just about exposing corruption. She wanted Eleanor to be free, free from shame, free from academic struggle, free from a father who saw her weaknesses but never her brilliance. Aria marked one last page in her notebook and closed it with finality. This isn't revenge, she said softly. It's education. The kind he spent years avoiding. And with her small hands gripping a mountain of evidence big enough to topple an empire, Aria Sinclair stepped out of the library. Ready to teach the most powerful man she'd ever met the lesson of his life. Morning sunlight spilled across the towering glass facade of Hawthorne Global, the corporate fortress Alexander Hawthorne believed nothing on earth could shake. Employees streamed inside as usual, polished shoes, clipped steps, the quiet hum of wealth-soaked confidence. But at 10:14 a.m., that confidence shattered. It began with a single notification on Alexander's phone. CNN breaking news. Whistleblower files expose Hawthorne housing scandal. He frowned. Another competitor smear attempt. He tapped the link casually. And froze. A reporter stood outside a pediatric hospital, holding his company's documents, stamped with Hawthorne Global's seal. Contracts. Internal emails. Legal memos he thought were buried. His own signature glared back at him like a ghost he couldn't outrun. Evidence shows the company knowingly built low-income housing on contaminated land, the reporter announced. 27 children hospitalized. Families silenced. Alexander's breath vanished. "No," he muttered. "This is impossible." This was secure. But the camera zoomed in on the documents, so close he could see the indentation of his pen marks. He staggered backward against his desk. How did this leak? Before he could process the nightmare unfolding on the screen, his assistant burst into the office, face white as marble. "Sir, there are reporters outside. Hundreds of them. And, the Department of Justice is downstairs." Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. "The DOJ? Why? They're executing a search warrant." "What warrant?" But she didn't have to answer. The door behind her swung open. Federal agents in navy jackets flooded the room, their voices firm, calm, authoritative. "Mr. Hawthorne, step aside. We are here to collect all electronic devices and internal records linked to the Riverside contracts." Alexander tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "There has to be a mistake." "Sir," an agent said without emotion, "your company's internal network was compromised months ago. Whoever accessed it left us a complete trail." A cold sweat crawled down Alexander's back. Compromised by who? An agent placed a folder on his desk. Inside was the line that destroyed him. User ID access, Hawthorne Home Net, guest_A. Origin, garden router. Garden. Router. His pulse stopped. The only person who ever used a device in the garden was Eleanor. And sitting beside her, Aria Sinclair. He gripped the desk so hard his knuckles turned bone white. A child had infiltrated his network. A homeless girl. A barefoot nobody. The humiliation hit him like a punch to the throat. While he was busy calling her an intruder, she had been taking down his empire. Across town, Aria watched the same news broadcast from the public library steps. Her backpack was beside her. Her mother dozed nearby. Professor Miriam sat beside her, eyes wide. "Aria, this is national news." Aria didn't blink. It needed to be. "You realize," Miriam whispered, "you just triggered a federal investigation." Aria nodded. "I know." Miriam stared at her, this small girl with a storm inside her chest and intelligence sharp enough to cut through steel. "You're not afraid?" Aria finally looked up. "People like me are born afraid. That's why people like him get away with things. I'm just done being afraid." The quiet conviction in her voice made Miriam shiver. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth spoken from the cracked edge of survival. Back in his marble office, Alexander watched his empire collapse in real time. Stock prices plummeted. Investors fled. Social media exploded with rage. His phone rang again, a blocked number. He answered with shaking fingers. A child's voice drifted through the speaker. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. "Hello, Mr. Hawthorne." His blood ran cold. "Aria," he whispered. "You built an empire on broken families," she said softly. "And you thought no one would ever see. How did you get into my network?" he demanded, voice taut with disbelief and terror. "You let your guard down," Aria replied. "Rich people always do. Especially when they think someone is beneath them." He squeezed his eyes shut. Shame and fear crashed into him like waves. Are you proud of this?" he choked. "No," Aria said. "This isn't pride. This is justice." His breath trembled. "What do you want from me?" There was a pause. Then Aria's voice softened into something tragic, something ancient, something far older than a 12-year-old should ever sound. "I want you to understand that power doesn't make you untouchable. It just makes your fall louder." And then the line went dead. Alexander stood there, destroyed, shaking, staring at the ruins of everything he ever built. His empire had fallen. His name was tarnished. His reputation was bleeding out on national television. And the person who did it was the barefoot girl he had ordered off his lawn. The world that once bowed to Alexander Hawthorne no longer returned his calls. His board resigned. His investors vanished. His mansion felt like a museum of a life he no longer owned. And the Hawthorne name, once stamped in gold across cities, now trended beside words like corruption, children, and cover-up. But none of it destroyed him the way a single phone call did. Not from the DOJ. Not from lawyers. Not from shareholders. It was a call from Eleanor. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his stripped-down office. Agents had taken most of the computers. Papers were scattered everywhere like debris from an explosion. He barely noticed. His phone buzzed. He expected another reporter. But the screen flashed. Eleanor, Boston Academy. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He answered with a shaking hand. "Ellie." Silence. Then a small, tired voice, a voice he hadn't heard in weeks. "Dad. I saw the news." Alexander closed his eyes, pressing his palm to his forehead as if the gesture could hold his world together. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," he whispered. "I'm not calling about the news," Eleanor said in a trembling voice. "I'm calling about her." His heart dropped. He knew exactly who "her" meant. "Eleanor. No. Please don't interrupt." She inhaled shakily. "I spoke to Aria." Alexander sat up straight, gripping the edge of his chair. "You, what? When?" "Last night," Eleanor whispered. "She told me everything. About the investigation. About what she found. About you." His throat tightened. "She shouldn't have." "Dad," Eleanor said softly, "she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect me." Alexander rubbed his eyes. "Ellie, I was trying to protect you too." "No, Dad. You were protecting your pride." Her words hit him harder than any federal charge. Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "You didn't see me. Not for years. You didn't see that I was drowning. You didn't see that I hated myself because numbers didn't make sense. You didn't even see me cry." Alexander felt the ground tilt beneath him. "Ellie, I didn't know." "That's the point," she cried. "You didn't know. But a girl from the street did. She cared. She listened. She noticed me. And you threw her out like trash. He forced himself to breathe. Ellie. I failed you. The truth tasted bitter in his mouth. But he didn't run from it. Not anymore. I failed you as a father. And I failed her as a human being. On the other end, Eleanor began to sob, soft, fragile, heartbreaking. I miss her, she whispered. She was my friend. Alexander felt a pain deeper than humiliation, a pain that came from seeing the child you love realize someone else gave them the comfort you never did. I miss you too, he said brokenly. I miss the chance to be who you needed. There was a rustling on the phone, then Eleanor said something so fragile he almost didn't hear it. Aria said, she hopes one day you can be proud of me. His breath caught. Proud. The word that Eleanor had been craving her entire childhood. Alexander's eyes burned. He lowered his head onto the desk and let the tears fall, something he hadn't allowed himself in 20 years. Eleanor, he whispered, voice cracking, I am proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I was just too blind to say it. More silence. Then. Do you think? Her voice softened to a trembling whisper. Do you think you could ever be proud of her too? Alexander's entire body went still. Images flashed before him, Aria's calm eyes, her fierce intelligence, her quiet dignity, her willingness to help a child she didn't know, her fearlessness as she stood against wealth, power, and cruelty. He understood something in that moment. Aria Sinclair didn't destroy him. She stripped away the lies he built around himself. Yes, he whispered. I could be proud of her. I already am. Eleanor let out a shaky breath, part relief, part grief. Dad, please fix this. Not for your reputation. For us. Alexander looked out at the city skyline, the empire he once ruled. I will, he promised. And I'm going to start by finding her. Then, Eleanor whispered, maybe there's a chance we can be a family again. The line clicked. Alexander stayed frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking like a billionaire. He was thinking like a father. And tomorrow, he would begin rebuilding his life, not with money, not with power, but with humility. Because somewhere in the city, a barefoot girl had taught him the greatest lesson of his life. Real strength isn't in building empires. It's in acknowledging when you were wrong. 6 months after Hawthorne Global collapsed, the world barely recognized the man who once stood at its throne. Alexander Hawthorne now lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the city's quieter side, no marble floors, no personal chef, no fleet of staff waiting for his commands. Just simple furniture, second-hand bookshelves, and a window that overlooked a plain street instead of a skyline. But for the first time in his life, he felt human. And for the first time in his life, he felt worthy of calling himself a father. Every week, he visited Eleanor at Boston Academy. Not with gifts. Not with money. But with time. Conversation. Effort. And Eleanor? She bloomed. Her grades soared now that teachers finally understood her learning difference. She made friends, real ones. She smiled without guilt. She laughed without fear. But every visit ended the same way. Dad, have you reached out to her? Her. Aria Sinclair. The girl he had wronged. The girl who had saved him by destroying him. The girl who had changed his entire life without asking for anything in return. Every time, Alexander felt a knot twist in his chest. "I'm trying," he'd say. And he was. But Aria had disappeared from every street he searched, every shelter he visited, every corner of the city. Until one winter morning, when his phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. Local news headline. Homeless teen awarded full scholarship to Harvard Law. Alexander's heart nearly stopped. There, on the screen, was a photo of Aria Sinclair, no longer barefoot, no longer hidden in shadows, but standing proudly beside a panel of professors. Her hair was neatly braided. She wore a donated blazer several sizes too big. Her smile was small, uncertain, but filled with something he had never seen in her before. A future. The article read. Aria Sinclair, 14, known for her extraordinary analytical skills and self-taught legal mind, has been accepted into Harvard's Young Scholars Program after assisting a team of civic lawyers in exposing a major corporate scandal. Alexander's throat tightened. She had done it. She had risen far above anything the world expected of her, anything he expected of her. He grabbed his coat and left his apartment without thinking. Aria was at the public library, the same steps where she once sat with her torn backpack and exhaustion carved into her bones. But this time, she stood beside Professor Miriam Blake, giving an interview to a small local news crew. Alexander approached slowly. He wasn't sure he deserved to get closer. Aria noticed him first. Her expression didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It simply steadied. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice calm, composed. He swallowed. "Aria. I came to say something I should have said the moment I met you." She lifted an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That I was wrong," he said. Every word trembled with honesty. "I judged you. I dismissed you. I failed my daughter and I failed myself. And even after all of that, you fought for justice. You fought for people you didn't even know." Aria said nothing. Alexander continued. "You destroyed my empire," he said quietly. "But you built my humanity." For the first time, Aria's expression shifted, not into a smile, not into forgiveness, but into recognition. She saw the truth in him. And Aria was a girl who could always tell when the truth was real. Eleanor suddenly appeared behind Alexander, having arrived from Boston for a surprise visit. She ran to Aria, hugging her so tightly it nearly knocked her backward. "You did it," Eleanor whispered. "You really did it." Aria hugged her back. "No," she murmured. "We did it." 2 years passed. And on a warm spring day, Aria stood inside the state capitol building beside lawmakers, journalists, and community activists. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. The governor himself held the pen. "Today," he announced, "we sign into law the Eleanor Hawthorne Education Access Act, ensuring free academic support, dyslexia testing, and learning resources for homeless and low-income children across the state." Alexander stood in the front row. Eleanor beside him. Aria on stage, head held high. Her name wouldn't be printed on the bill. But her fingerprints were everywhere. The governor handed Aria the signed copy. "This law exists because of you," he told her. Aria met Alexander's eyes across the room, not with blame, not with anger, but with something stronger. "Peace." He nodded, silently thanking the child who had changed the course of his life, and thousands of others. And as Aria stepped down from the stage, Eleanor squeezed her hand. So what now? Eleanor asked. Aria looked ahead, toward Harvard, toward justice, toward a world that once tried to bury her. Her voice was soft, steady, unshakable. Now, she said, I change everything. And she did.